I think it was the teacher, and you know, they all say that it's the teacher that inspires you, and Miss Cronin will forever be etched in my memory. Hot summer afternoons in the class, she'd always close all the windows, which was on one level guaranteed to send you to sleep, but then she would transport you into the Roman Forum or the Colosseum, and you were just in another world, and I just wanted to be in that world. Absolutely not. I had no clue what I wanted to do other than I loved classics, which is why I studied it, and I loved acting. And I did think briefly about being an actress, and I applied to drama school, and then I decided that the world didn't need another mediocre actress, so I ditched that one. And it was really a sort of needs must moment that I had some bills to pay. I actually kept failing my driving test, which was very expensive, and I couldn't own up to my dad that I kept failing. So I needed to find the money to pay for the lessons because I couldn't ask him. And that's when I started my first business. And I just remembered that I had this talent for selling, which I'd had as a child. And so I decided I'd start a restaurant guide and sell advertising, and that was my first business. Actually, the true answer to that question is aged 5, because my granny had a beautiful garden, and in that garden was a large conker tree. And I remember taking the conkers that had fallen to the ground and polishing them up, and I was about 5, 6 years old, taking them into school and selling them at a penny each, an old penny each, to my classmates, and selling them quite successfully. And I got into lots of trouble when my teacher discovered me with a matchbox full of silver sixpences and shillings, because she thought A, I was playing with matches, and B, I'd pinched the money. And she took it from me, and she said, no, we're going to put it on in the church plate. So she took the money from me, and I was absolutely outraged, because I said, but Mrs. Jackson, I earned that money, you know, you can't take that from me. And she said, well, I can. Anyway, about 10 years later, when I was 15 or so, I met her at a bus stop, and I said, Mrs. Jackson, you still owe me 5 shillings and 6pence. But I think that was the time I realised, albeit in a very sort of young way, that I had this talent for selling. Well, Alison at Home was actually my second business. So my first big business was a publishing company, which really grew from the advertising business that I had started at university. And that company had a couple of very successful titles. It was a mail order book company, which went public in 1994. And I did my 2 years as a director of a publicly quoted company, but I really felt that wasn't quite for me. It was quite institutional, and I wanted to be out there on my own again. So I just sat down and thought, what is it you really love? What is your passion? Is it actually books? And the answer was no, it's not really selling books by mail order. That's something I kind of fell into. My passion is home. Now, my problem was that I'd had a very good education, and I didn't think my parents were going to appreciate me saying, I'd like to be a housewife, please, now, having been to Cambridge and all that stuff. And then I looked across the pond and I saw Martha Stewart, who'd built what was then $1 billion empire out of home. And I thought, okay, we do not have a British Martha Stewart, so I'm going to make home my business. I'm going to commercialise it, and I'm probably going to sort of look at what she's done and sort of follow that model, which is what I did. Well, I think I would quote somebody else here. So Natalie Massenet said, the path to success is never straight. And I think that that's absolutely true, and it's also really important to acknowledge that. And when I'm talking to other people, especially women, about starting a business, I always insist on a level of honesty, because if you tell somebody that, you know, as a successful person it was all a bit of a breeze, you're doing them an enormous disservice, and they're probably going to give up before they start, and that's not what we want. We want more women to start their own business, not fewer. So the short answer to your question is it's very testing, you know, and I've had my fair share of difficulties. So I had no female role models when I started in business. Literally, this was in the mid-80s, and there was Margaret Thatcher going out there as a woman doing her thing, being Prime Minister, and there was Debbie Moore, who'd founded the dance studio Pineapple, and they were probably the only 2 high-profile women I could name, maybe Anita Roddick of Body Shop, but that was about it, you know, less than one hand. And so it was really difficult. I had nobody to really sort of watch and whose progress I could follow. And I didn't really have access to any business information. So my starting in business was very much trial and error, you know, and I made all the mistakes that one might make, which is not getting good professional information. You know, I remember mucking up a VAT return and having to sort of dispute it at a VAT tribunal, and it was just, you know, I made every mistake in the book. So really testing. And as I went on in business, you know, there were always more challenges, and far more recently, about 6 or 7 years ago, actually two of my employees defrauded my company, which, you know, later in life is a terrible blow, because you think you're on the track then, you've learned everything there is to be learned and your business is stable. But what I would say about business is, you know, you have to be aware. I say you have to be a bit like a rabbit with 360-degree vision. You have to be looking all around you all the time. Never assume that you're comfortable, you're safe, that you know all the answers. Every day is a journey, and you've got to be on your mettle all the time. So, you know, what I would say is that I think I'm very resilient, and I think that is absolutely critical as an entrepreneur. So it's never been easy, and, you know, I think it's important to say that. It has been successful, but it's been successful because I've never given up, and I never shall give up. That's in my DNA, I think. So having been in business for 30 years, you know, I remember looking back, and there was Margaret Thatcher and Debbie Moore and one or two other people in business. And I thought, well, 30 years later, surely there'll be loads more women running their own business. We'll have taken a quantum leap. And I was really surprised when I looked at the statistics, and I saw that only 1 in 5 businesses today, you know, in 2019, is owned or led by a woman. And that really surprised me. You know, why aren't more women running their own business? And so I started to look into the reasons why and do a bit of research, because, you know, every entrepreneur will tell you that curiosity is one of the most important factors, and I am a very curious person. So I started looking into the reasons why, and what came back was lack of self-confidence, lack of female role models, and lack of networking opportunities. And I thought, well, you know, those are not insurmountable problems. If we constructed a sort of nationwide series of networks and seminars and brought women together both on the ground and also digitally online, so that they can actually reach out to someone who lives in a different geographical area but access them for knowledge and information and support, you know, that isn't too big a deal. We can do that, I'm sure. And so I founded the National Women's Enterprise Network, which runs seminars which we call Make It Your Business, because it's a bit more catchy as a name. And we encourage women who are either running a business already or thinking of running a business but haven't quite had the courage to take the step, to just come along to these seminars. And we put established female entrepreneurs in front of wanting to be female entrepreneurs, and we tell them to tell their story to the audience, but tell it really, really honestly. And it is that spirit of sort of camaraderie and sharing and honesty which inspires women, because they see real women in front of them who've made mistakes, for whom it hasn't been easy, and yet who've still succeeded eventually. And they think, well, hang on a minute, I'm not so different to that person, I can do that. And it's transformational. It's absolutely fascinating how it energizes people. I'd probably say that the fact that there is a party illustrates that there is a need for greater equality. So it has sort of raised consciousness of the debate. But do we need a women's equality party in politics, active? I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I'm a firm believer that we want a party that has a reasonable and equitable representation of men and women, because that is what is going to deliver a balanced set of policies and decision making. And so I'm probably not in favour of there being a women-only party particularly, but I am supportive of the fact that it has created discussion, and that is important because, you know, like it or not, we need to make sure that we're in the news and that people are being made conscious of the issues which we think are at stake. Yes, absolutely. I mean, give me 4 years, it might be me, but no, definitely. I mean, we haven't had mayors in London for that long. I think Ken Livingstone was our first. So, you know, I think absolutely there will be a lady mayor of London, as there should be. And I'm sure it will be within the next 10 years or so. And women have an awful lot to bring to the table, you know, in business, in politics. And I think it's really, again, it's really curious, you know, the numbers of women in politics, they mirror the numbers of women running their own business very closely. So about 20%, only 20% of all MPs are women. And about 20% of businesses are run or led by women. And I think that's a really interesting parallel. And there should be far more, because if you think about it, if you want sensible, balanced decision-making that reflects the gender balance of this country, if you want that sensible decision-making to come out of the other end of the sausage machine, you've got to put reasonably equal numbers of men and women into the front of the machine, or you're not going to get a balanced answer out the other end. And I think it is, it is just a matter of time now. I think there is a sort of an understanding that that is needed, and a lot of groups, run by people like myself in entrepreneurship. I belong to sort of activist groups in politics, and I think the important thing to say is that we're not asking to be sort of unfairly advanced or promoted. Quite the opposite. We just want the opportunity to stand on an equal footing and be judged on our ability. And there are many, many hugely talented, well-educated women, and education is part of it and needs to be a continuing part of it, but hugely talented women who are waiting to contribute. And we just need that opportunity, and people like myself are going to try and ensure that that happens. I think so. I think if you're born a Londoner, then you're always a Londoner. And there is a really sort of emotive pull. I mean, in fact, I went back to my home last year. So when I was running for a candidate for Mayor of London, I decided that I couldn't really look London in the face, to sort of paraphrase the Queen Mother, if I didn't know it properly. So I got hold of my friend who's a black cab driver, and I said, right, we're going to take a day and I'm going to sit in the back of your cab because I don't know anybody who knows London better than you, and you're going to drive me through every one of the 33 boroughs and unload your knowledge as we drive. So in the course of that day, which was amazing, we ended up in Bexley, which is where I was born and brought up. And we drove down my road. And the first time we drove straight past my house because it had completely changed and I didn't recognise it. They'd sort of crazy paved the entrance so that they could park 3 cars. Well, we didn't even have 1 car when I was a kid there. The tree had gone and all that stuff. Anyway, we identified the house and I said, can you just stop the cab? I just need to just go and sort of look at it. And I stood outside the front door and I burst into tears. And the door opened and a woman answered it, and I started to say, I'm so sorry that I'm standing in front of your house crying. And she said, oh no, she said, I know who you are. And I said, oh, you mean you know that I used to live here? She said, no, you're off the telly. So anyway, the point was that there was this really strong emotive pull after, 30 years that I hadn't been there. I stood there and burst into tears, and that's because it meant something to me. Where you live is really important, and London is important to me. I am a Londoner born and bred. I have lived in London for over half a century. That means something. And when I was standing as the prospective candidate, that was a real part of my idea on policy, my feeling for the city, because nobody goes for mayor half-heartedly. You've got to really want that job. That is a big job. And I just thought, what are my qualifications for being even remotely good at this? And I just decided that feeling so strongly about my city and its place in the world, and really truly believing that we are the greatest city in the world, that's got to be part of it, because I would fight tooth and nail for every issue that affected my city. And at the end of the day, I wasn't the lucky candidate, but actually I've continued to work with that candidate on his campaign, and it's given me great pleasure because I still think London's the greatest city in the world.